One feature that you're likely to see on almost every report in Google Analytics is the main data over time chart. This is the chart you'll see here where we've got data graphed over time. And this is great, it gives us a 10,000-foot view, but to really utilize it, we can configure it to show much more. For example, let's take a look at the audience report that shows website traffic by device category. This can be found under Audience, and we'll scroll down to Mobile, and we can look at the overview here. Now, this overview report can be useful to compare the traffic coming from mobile devices, desktop, and even tablets. I've adjusted the time period for this particular report up here in the top right corner. I'm also viewing this data in terms of days, which I set here, although I could set this in terms of weeks or even months. And you see, if I do that, the visual representation of this here is going to change quite drastically here. For now, I'm going to go with the most granular one of a day because I've only got a couple of months here, 3 months, and so I want to be able to see individual days. But if we had a much longer time period, if we just wanted to see large trends, it might make sense to use one of the other two options. Even though this is a really simple report, we can get some insights out of this. For example, one of the things we can see here if we scroll down is that the number of users seems to fall off quite a bit over the weekend. So Saturday and Sunday, and then rises again on the week. So we see a very consistent, repeatable pattern here just with a brief look. So right now, this graph is set to users, which we can change with this drop down here. And what we're going to see are these drop downs. These are grouped the same way that these tabs up here are grouped. So we have e-commerce, goal set 1, site usage, and summary. So inside of these are going to be different metrics that are going to correspond to those. So in the site usage, we talk about sessions and bounce rates and users. In the e-commerce section up here, we would talk more about things around commerce, like average order value and revenue, transactions, things like that. So speaking of e-commerce, let's go ahead here and grab revenue and put the graph to revenue over time. Now, what's interesting, we see some spikes here. The most basic kind of analysis I want to rule out is whether there were simply more users on the days that had higher revenue. So I could try to think back to that users one, or I could actually put that right on top of it. I can go here to select a metric, come down to site usage, and I could grab users. In this case, what I really want to see is sessions. If I'm getting more sessions, I would assume I'm getting more transactions, and so I can overlay those. You see the light blue here are the number of sessions, and our existing dark blue is the number of revenue. So on this spike, we do indeed see that there are a high number of sessions on that day, but there are also a high number of sessions on the next day, and our revenue drops dramatically. So it's not always that the two are directly correlated. So this ability to change this graph and even put two different metrics on at the same time is something that's quite an underutilized feature. Most people look right past it. Now, another thing we can do, instead of comparing two different metrics, we can also compare two different time periods with a single metric. So I'm going to hit the X here that's going to clear out the sessions. I'm going to bring back my drop down and I'm going to say compare to previous period. And it's automatically going to set it to the same time period, but a previous one. And if I say OK, it's going to overlay these on top of each other. It's going to be the same metric, revenue, but for the different time periods. So in blue, I see the one I originally had selected, April 15th or June 15th. And in orange, we have February 12th through April 14th, right up to that time period. This can be really useful for month over month, year over year, those kinds of type of analysis where we're trying to compare one time period against another for the same metric. Okay, taking away the compare time period one, another thing we can add to this is the ability to plot individual rows in addition to the overview. So for example, I could come down here and I can select desktop and I could select mobile and I can plot those rows. And what we see immediately is that there is almost no revenue coming from mobile. That green line is skidding down here along the bottom, barely skimming along, and almost all of the revenue overall is led by desktop. In fact, those two are almost an exact match. The only time I see here where they're not is on May 5th, where we had a slight increase in mobile, and therefore the desktop didn't entirely match the overall revenue, but everywhere else we can see that mobile's not really making a dent. Certainly something we want to analyze more closely, figure out why that might be, but this graph immediately shows us that insight. Okay, so the data over time graph is a staple of Google Analytics. It allows us to visualize our data quickly and effectively, and the customization options make it a more versatile tool than most people realize.